Hey everyone, Sofilic here, and today we are going to talk a little bit about the new Micro Chorus and Micro Flanger modules, which have been recently added to the Micro Bundles bundle. Now, chorus and flanger are two pretty staple modulation effects in the electronic music scene, but also outside of that you see a lot of guitar and even pianos and stuff. You will see a lot of chorus being used because it's a very good modulation effect to quickly add movement and also stereo to mono sounds. Now, because in this video I want to focus solely on our chorus and flanger, I've decided to use pigments as a input, and we're inputting a mono signal. So the patch I have going on pigments, it's very simple. It's just a sawtooth wave combined with a square wave, and underneath is a sine for a extra bass layer, which will become relevant a little bit later on in this video. So just out of the box, it sounds a little like this. Not all that interesting, and as you can see in the monitoring here, it's a purely mono signal. So here we have our new chorus module. Now we wanted to make it a little bit different than the chorus that's already in Voltage, because why remake what is already there? So we changed a few of its features. Now the way chorus works is that you make a copy of the original signal and you delay this by a certain amount of time. This time is then modulated with an LFO, and this causes the chorusing effect. So at the top of our module you find this delay time, which can be set all the way from 0 to 42 milliseconds, which for a chorus is rather long, but it's always good to have a little bit of headroom when you want to do crazy stuff. The modulation speed determines how fast the internal LFO is running, and the modulation depth determines how much the delay time is altered by the LFO. So let's start with those two parameters and let's kick up the mix a little bit so I can actually hear our chorus. Let's put it at 50-50 and let's quickly go through the first three parameters. So let's change the delay time a little bit. So the shorter the delay time, the more you get into that unison kind of sound. And if you start to up the modulation, now we have a pretty wide modulation speed range going from 0.0001 Hertz all the way up to 16 something Hertz, and this is really quite aggressive for a chorus. But again, it's nice to have a little bit of extra space on your dials if you want to do some weird stuff. And kind of touch that almost FM-ish range. Of course, if you just keep it low, it will be more of the classical chorus vibe. Changing the depth basically changes how strong the chorusing effect is. The next parameter is our voices parameter. Our chorus has one voice. If you have it all the way to the left, if you turn all the way to the right, you will have four voices, and you can actually fluidly move between the amount of voices by fading voices in, which is quite a nice feature. Now by adding more voices you get a more rich palette of sound, and Chris did some really clever math stuff to make sure that even when you up the amount of voices you don't get crazy spikes in volume, because after all adding more delay lines can cause that issue where the volume gets a lot higher. Due to some very smart thinking on Chris's behalf, we don't have that issue with our chorus, which is very neat. And the parameter underneath our voices control is the low cut control. And this is where that lower LFO comes in handy, because it makes it a little bit more audible what is going on. So basically, before the signal goes into the delay lines, where you get that modulated delay, there is a filter which will cut out any frequency below it. That signal will completely bypass the delay lines, and in the end it will be mixed back in. This means that the low frequencies will not be part of the delayed signal and they will just stay intact and mono, which greatly helps when you have sounds which are very rich in frequency content, and it helps with phase issues in lower frequency content. It also just makes things sound more bassy. So if you have, for instance, a patch like this with a bass oscillator in there, you can bypass that in your chorus, which means your overall sound will be a lot more bassy. So let's quickly go through that. Actually, let's just analyze that for a second with Analyzer, so we get a little bit of visual feedback as well. As you can see with the load cutoff, we get quite a big wobble on our bass note. So it's a very neat tool to have if you have sounds which are a little bit bass heavy that lose their impact when you put a chorus on them. This is definitely highly recommended. Underneath our low cut we have a feedback, which allows you to feedback the signal into the delay line. Now this is a little bit of a tricky control because it actually goes over 1, which means that it is full feedback, which can lead to some signal issues. So be a little bit careful with the dial at the higher end of the range. Now there are measures in place to make sure that it doesn't completely blow up, but it's still important to be a little bit mindful that once you pass the 99 range you are getting internal feedback loops, which will increase the output level significantly. So be a little bit careful with it, but it's a nice creative tool to have. And of course underneath that we have a mix input, the minus 50% to plus 50%. You can input a stereo or a mono signal. In case of a mono, just connect your mono to both inputs and then output both outputs as a stereo signal. Great way to convert mono to stereo signals. One of the fun little tricks with the micro chorus that you can do is you can actually use your own LFO instead of the built-in LFO. which is quite simple to do. You just put the modulation depth at 0. And now if you turn the delay, you will modulate the delay time, obviously. You could do this by hand, but that's a little bit ludicrous, of course. So I would highly recommend just grabbing vapor droplets, our free LFO, or the micro LFO, or any LFO, and using that to modulate this parameter. Modulation can be done either with a linear or a exponential CV. Let's go through some shapes to see how this forms the chorus sound. Now, not everything will sound equally good, but still very interesting that you can actually use custom shapes as an LFO in your chorus, just to add a little bit more taste and personality to your sounds. So definitely experiment with that, try it, and see if you like it or not. The Micro Flanger shares a lot of DNA with chorus, a lot of the same controls. Instead of delay time, we have an offset in this case, although it kind of fills the same purpose. If you put the modulation depth at 0, you can manually modulate the delay in the flanger, and of course you can also connect a external LFO as long as you have the mod depth at 0. For some very erratic patterns. Another thing you can do is actually use a saw. If you put it really low, you can have that re-trigger from your synth. To get a really predictable sound in your phaser. Which I think is a pretty neat little trick. Many of the controls are similar. We have a mod speed and mod depth. Again, pretty big ranges on this. And unlike the chorus, you have the option to either have stereo or mono. And again a low cut to bypass the low frequencies to keep those out of the modulation chain, and then probably the most important part of the flanger, the feedback control. To get those really wild jetty sounds. Again, neat little trick here. That predictability is pretty cool to play around with. So that's microchorus and flanger in a nutshell. I think it's a very nice addition to finally have some extra modulation effects in micro modules, and we really hope you can find a good use for these. If there are any questions, as always, drop them down below, and I would say until the next one, see ya.